Well, hi everybody, welcome to my latest video. Well, in this one I'm going to make some more changes to this PC. This was my sort of general purpose extra office PC that I built with some extra parts at one point that I've made a couple of upgrades to, as I've shown in previous videos. You'll see a couple of the links in the end screen to some of those videos if you're interested. My main objective is to install Ubuntu Linux as a secondary operating system onto this PC. It currently is running Windows 10, latest build, and it works fine. It has a Intel i7-3770 CPU, which is several years old, and a matching motherboard from Asus that supports that. It has actually 16 gig of DDR3 memory that's running at 1600 megahertz. It also has an SSD on it. I think there's 480 gigabytes on that SSD. And originally I was going to take that SSD and split it and install Linux on half of it and leave the Windows installed on the other half, which is a standard installation capability of Linux, and then have it what's called dual bootable. There's always a risk when you're doing dual boot. You could wind up losing both operating systems. At least if I install Linux on a separate, in this case SSD, then it'll be much safer. It'll be isolated to the most part, and then I would use the BIOS to switch between them, depending on which one of the SSDs I want to boot on. So what I'm going to install is not another 480 gig. So I got this spare 256 gig SSD. And it's got some pretty good specs to it. I actually got it as a gift. It was sitting as one of my extras. So I'm going to put that in. There is an extra spot in it. Actually, I already have the cable run, the SATA cable run to the back. I was using that when I was doing some other testing with this before. So all I have to do is run it to the front and connect it up along with a power connector to this new SSD. And then this was the one that I'll have installed Linux on. And the one I'm going to go with is the latest version, 20.04. I think the actual sub-release, I think it might be 20.04.2 or something like that. It doesn't really matter. It's a latest long-term supported version that I'm going to install, so I make sure I can always get updates and patches to this one. The reason I'm doing this, just to let you know, is I want to turn this PC into a test PC. A test PC for very special purposes. As you noticed, if you looked at one of my previous videos on my upgrades to this, it has USB 3.0. I had to add a card into this particular system because the motherboard didn't support USB 3.0, but the case had 3.0 support. So I installed a card. It gives me the one up front with a special cable that I got. I also showed it in that video, along with a couple of more USB 3.0s from the back of the PC. And that way, when I'm doing reviews and testing of some of the small peripherals that I've been testing recently, things like webcams and video capture devices and even scanners and other types of things, tablets, then I could connect them up to this and test them not only against Windows, which is what I've been doing up to this point, but I'll also test them against Linux. I've had several people ask if that sort of testing had been done. I told them no, and they asked if it was possible, and I said, I need to make a setup. And I don't want to do it through virtual images. It's not really an accurate measure of the performance. And also, there's technical issues when you try to go through a VM and connect up to any USB port. It does work, but it's a little bit kludgy, is what I refer to it as. So this way I'll have a nice clean one. If somebody's running a standalone PC that is running Ubuntu, then my testing results would apply to their PC. So that's the objective right now. I'm next going to go over to the Ubuntu website, and I'm on this USB. It's a 16 gig USB that I have. I'm going to install the installer for Ubuntu, the Ubuntu workstation part of it. They have server and workstation. For this one, I'm going to put workstation. And that way I'll have another test system to do it with. Let me switch on over to a screen capture of this, and we'll be able to see what I do to get this thing up and running with a dual purpose, both Windows and Ubuntu. Okay, so I got the drive. It's going to go into this slot here in the bottom, and I'm going to screw it in from the back with four screws. Okay, that's in. Mess up my cable management a little bit, but I'm going to disconnect this power cable here to SATA power. Might make it easier for me to get to this one here. But I'm going to put a SATA power down on the bottom one. Maybe disconnect this as well. Disconnect this one, put this one in here first, like this. And then I'll put this one in here second, up above. So now they both have power. Let me put this one back where I got it from, which was right in here. A little bit tight, but that's okay. And then this is the extra one that I had that I just unraveled from the cable ties. It was already back here, and that's going to go down into the bottom one. Push this stuff out of the way and try to squeeze this one up underneath here. Actually, I may have to take this power one off to do it right so I can get to it. Get this one in here first, and then I can get that out of the way, and then I can put this power connector back up into here. I'm going to have some serious cable management to do here. I had to tear apart this whole bundle, but I won't worry about that right now. I'll fix that later. Okay, I'm going to start by making sure that the USB drive that I'm using, the stick drive, is clear. It's been used before, so I'm not 100% sure. So what I will do is I will insert it into the PC. So now it's drive E. But I'm going to run a special Windows utility. I've run it before, but let me show it again. It wouldn't hurt. This is an interesting thing that becomes very handy. If you run command prompt, which by the way, it's one of the utilities I happen to have in the start menu, but you'd have to go all the way down to Windows, System, and the first choice there is command prompt. That's what I have. I'm going to, though, right click on it, and I'm going to click more, and I'm going to say run as administrator. I want it to have the full power. Stretch this out a little bit. So the first thing I'll do is I'll do a disk part. That's the name of it. It's a standard Windows 10 utility. Now we have a disk part prompt. If you're interested, there's a lot of commands to this. I type help here, and I'm only going to be using a couple of these commands. The first thing is I want to do a list disk. So list is a function here, display a list of objects, and then you can be further. So if I just said list, it's asking for more. What do I want to list? Disk, parts, volumes, whatever. I only care about the disk right now. I can arrow up and then just do this and say disk. Those are the disks that are currently installed on this PC. The first one is the booted drive, disk 0, the SSD that I have that I boot from. A second drive is a 1 terabyte hard drive that I have. It's a pretty fast one, and that's where I put it for purposes of storage, and I'm going to leave that on there. It'll stay on this PC. But disk 2 is this USB stick, see, 14 gigabytes. It looks like it might be clear, but let me go ahead and make sure. So what I'll do is I'll say, so what we got to do is do a select disk 2. Now it says disk 2 is selected. If I go back now and do a list disk, you now see a little asterisk next to disk 2. That is my current drive that I'll be operating on. One more time, let me show you the commands. And one of the commands that I'm going to do now is definitive. It's a command called clean right here. They're alphabetical order. And this will clear the configuration information, all information off of a disk. Be very careful with this. If you have to have the right drive selected, make sure you don't have your boot drive selected, because that would be disastrous. But now if I say it because I have the right one, and I'll double check by doing it again, list disk, and it is the one that's selected with the asterisk. Now if I do clean, it has completely cleaned that disk. Even if you look over to the right, the drive has been reset by Windows. So when I did that, it actually completely cleared it out. The only problem now is I don't have any partitions on it. I got to have at least a partition, a primary partition. So what I'm going to do is create, you don't have to type the whole thing, by the way, create part, which means partition, create a partition. And I believe I say primary. I'm still set for that disk, right? So this is where it's going to create a primary partition. Disk part successful in creating the specified partition. At this point, the drive is usable. So this is good. Now let me go and get Ubuntu, the ISO image. So if I go into any browser and I click on Ubuntu, one of the choices in Enterprise, Open Source, and Linux Ubuntu is download. I'm going to go straight to download. And by default, it's trying to download the Ubuntu desktop as opposed to the Ubuntu server, which I showed in a previous video how that's installed. I've also done it using virtual machines or VMs, but this time I'm just going to do it this way. Let me go ahead and download it. Clicked on that. It is 20.4.2.0 LTS, which is long-term support. They explain what that is here. Let me do a download. And now it's starting to download. If you look down here in the corner, left-hand corner, lower left-hand corner. I may speed ahead at this point. Okay, it has finished downloading. So let me now go into the downloads area of this browser. And I really want to go into Open Downloads. And from here, I see the Ubuntu 20.04.2.0. I'm just going to copy this directly to, let me close this background one. I don't need that right now. I'm going to move this actually over to my desktop. It's an ISO file. In order to get that onto the USB stick, however, we're going to have to run a program. It's called Win32 Disk Imager. Freeware tool, easy to install, so I won't bother showing that here. But when you run it, you have to be administrator. Let me stretch this out a little bit. I believe it grows. Yeah, it does. It automatically sees that we have the only USB stick that we have is in drive E, right? It confirmed that when we first plugged it in. But I got to tell it where to get the image to copy onto that USB stick. So I click on this little disk thing here, and then I'm going to go to desktop, and I have to change this so it looks at all files. And here it is, do Ubuntu 20.04.2.0 desktop image. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to say open. It now will copy this image over to that USB drive. I'm not going to pick any other options. I won't get into it now. Hash is if you are not sure where it came from and you want to make sure that it's the right one. Ubuntu has what's called a hash value for all of its files that it created. And you could enter that here, and then Win32 Disk Imager would validate that the one that you've downloaded and are trying to load onto your USB is the right one. No need to do that right now. I know I got it from the right place. So let me do a write. Are you sure? Yep. And now this is going to take a while, so I'll probably speed ahead here. Okay, it's all done. Write successful. So I'll say okay to this, and now I have what should be a bootable USB stick. So in the next step, I will boot it up. Okay, to simplify things, avoid a lot of confusion, I'm going to disconnect the other two hard drives, the Windows one and the 1 terabyte extra disk that I have in there. They're in order here right now. The top one is the Windows one, this one is the extra one, and this new one in the bottom, that's the one I just added. So I'll remove these two, like that, and I will take this one in the bottom here, and I will bring it up to the top. That way the only hard drive, well, the only solid state drive that's in here will be the new one that I just added, the 240 gig. So when I install it, it'll make it a lot simpler, because I plan on always keeping that one reserved for Linux anyway. Okay, ideally you want to put the USB that you want to boot an operating system from in one of the USBs near any mouse. That's usually the ones that work best. Now I've already got the wireless mouse on this one, so let me put this in here like that. That's usually the one that is most easily detected by the BIOS. Okay, I now have the USB drive installed in the proper location. Turn on the power supply, and then I'll hit power on. I'm going to go into the BIOS first. It probably would do anyway, or automatically boot from the USB, because the other SSD I put in there does not have an operating system on it. But just in case, let me go into the BIOS first. I'm hitting delete, in the BIOS. And right now it sees two drives. It sees my 256 gigabyte drive and the UFE. Let me just go straight over to this boot menu. And what I'll do is I'll just make sure it boots from the USB directly. We'll see what happens. And there it is. Ubuntu is actually booting at this point. Oh, it's doing a file system repair at this point. I guess when I created the disk, that happens sometimes when you use Win32 Imager. It sometimes will do that. It just takes a few seconds. I'll jump ahead on this. Okay, it got past the disk. Oh, here's the Ubuntu installer. I'll take mostly the defaults on this. Install Ubuntu. Keyboard is English. Normal installation. Download updates as it installs. Go ahead. It's going to wipe that disk clean, which is fine. It has nothing on it anyway. It's brand new. Giving me a warning basically that it's going to wipe everything out. Go ahead. Oh, it recognized that I'm in New York. That's surprising. I'll accept that and continue. Now it wants my username. You got to be careful with letters you pick on initial installation with Ubuntu. You can't pick special characters. So for now I'll just put David, and I'll use my administrator password for this one, because by default I should come up as an administrator. And I think that's about it. I do want to apply a password whenever I log in. That's the default, so I'll take that. Yeah, now it's installing files. It's usually pretty quick unless you want to do something fancy. And also I simplified it quite a bit by only having one drive in there that it could install to. That's one of the main reasons I did it. Okay, it's all done, and it wants to do a restart. I'll say okay. Installation USB, so I'll pull that out, and then I'll hit enter. And there we go. It's ready for me to log in. Let me click on this one, and I'll type my password. And it's going into Linux. It's giving me some initial setup questions. I'm going to skip this. I don't want it to connect to my other accounts. Yeah, do live patch, that's fine. Why not? I'm just taking a default on all of that. Now hit done, it's all ready to go. We're up in the desktop of Linux. Let me change the resolution. And that's a little more readable, so that's what I'll leave it with that particular resolution for purposes of this video. The software updater, you might as well install the updater. Go ahead. And then you come down. I'll have a separate video very soon to show some basic operating things you need to know about Linux itself if you have no exposure to it. I just wanted to show how this was set up. I clicked on the little box in the lower left-hand corner there, show applications. I can actually unshow them if I want again too. So this is the Linux desktop, and it's looking good. Now going forward, I'm going to have to go into the BIOS whenever I want to boot from one operating system to the next. So I'll have to put the other drives back, I'll reconnect those, and then I'll be able to boot right up into either one, depending on which one I choose during the initial boot. Let me try that right now, and you'll see what I mean. I'll go back to Windows. Let me shut this one down though first. Let's do a power off. Right there. Okay, I've shifted around the SATA data cables in the front of this PC, like I did when I just put one on. I just put all three of them. The first one I put was the Windows one, the second one that I put was the Linux one, and the third one was the extra 1 terabyte drive that will be able to actually transfer files very easily between the two operating systems using that hard drive. So let me boot this up and go into the BIOS and see what it looks like. And if I come in here and take a look at the boot menu, what do I got as choices? I got the Ubuntu solid-state disk. Has a lot of partitions to choose from. It's really the main one here, the SM partition. And then we got the team hard drive, which is my Windows. So, and there's a Western Digital, which is the fine. So I see all three of them there. So let me go ahead and boot this one, the team one, which is the one that should have Windows on it. And let's see if Windows comes up. And it looks like it's coming up. And there we go. I can log into Windows here. I didn't touch that drive at all, so it should work just fine. Let's see what the drives look like. And right now I just see drive C, and I see this drive. It'll be the same thing with Linux. They'll both see this drive because Linux can recognize a regular Windows partitioned disk. So this is an area where I could transfer between the two if I'd like to, or I could go to one of the shared drives that they can both get access to. So I have two choices. This would be usable if I'm not connected to the network, and this one would be usable if I am. So I think that covers what I wanted to do. Well, that concludes this video of turning this general purpose, somewhat legacy PC, well, you know, it's several years old, into a dual operating system PC. Of course, I decided to put things on two separate drives, as I mentioned in the beginning, but I think that's a benefit here because that way I could totally isolate one from the other. There is a third drive in here, that 1 terabyte hard drive, and that'll be the area where I could transfer files between the two, or I could use the network. Either way. As you see, it works fine, and future videos where I'm reviewing small peripheral products that are USB based, I'll be able to test them on both operating systems and give people assurance that those devices work okay. Well, until the next time, take care, thanks for watching, be safe.